Hello and welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. My name is Kelly and I'm a former wedding planner and blogger, and I'm obsessed with weddings. If you're planning a wedding in Ireland, you're in the right place. You're going to learn the tried and tested methods to planning your dream wedding without the added stress. Think of this as your one-stop shop for everything to do with planning your wedding in Ireland. With me, your new wedding planning bestie, and a cup of tea. This is Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Well, hello and welcome to the Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast. I have a special guest with me today. His name is Glen. Hi, Glen.
Hello.
So today, Glen and I are going to be talking about wedding Icks. And now, if you are watching on YouTube, you will probably be seeing that Glen and I are sitting very close to each other. But that's okay because we're married. He's my husband.
This is true.
Yeah, so he's allowed to sit this close to me. But today we're going to talk about wedding Icks, okay? So now, Glen, do you know what an ick is?
Yeah, I know what they are.
Okay. So we're going to go through the Icks. Now, I asked you guys to tell me your Icks, and I haven't even listed all of them because we've got so many. And what we're going to do is we're just going to talk a little bit about the Icks. Glen, you and I can laugh about some of them.
Sounds good.
I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I think it'll be really fun.
I have a lot of Icks. Some of them are wedding related. Some are just Icks in general. But now I first have to say, before we even get in, there's no judgment here. So we're going to name some things that other people have said. It doesn't mean that we necessarily agree with these things being Icks. And so I don't want anyone to feel judged by us, judged by the people who've sent their Icks in. I don't want you to go and question your whole wedding plan that you've made. That's not what we're doing here. We're just having a little bit of a laugh. The idea here is to get an understanding of what other people have enjoyed or not enjoyed about weddings, and just to have a really good attitude about how people experience other people's weddings. So we do have some controversial ones, but we'll do those towards the end. Glen, why don't you kick us off? We got a really good ick that came in from a guy. Why don't you read it? Let's see what we have.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so massive wedding ick. Depictions of the groom not wanting to be there. He's been dragged away from his PlayStation, or he's in handcuffs going up the aisle, or his shoes have helped me on the soles or whatever. Gross. Pretend you like your wife, man.
You know what? I have to say that out of all the icks, this is one that I wholeheartedly agree with. It is a big ick.
Yeah. As much as I love playing PlayStation, yeah, keep those jokes for another day.
Yeah, it's I don't know if you've ever seen those wedding cakes. I mean, they're kind of like circa Pinterest in 2013, where it's a groom being dragged by his bride, that's the cake topper on the top of the wedding cake.
Really?
I don't know if you've ever seen those before, but there was a trend that people did, and I remember seeing it, and actually I didn't know what an ick was at the time, but I got the ick.
You experienced the ick at that moment.
Yes, I experienced the ick before, but I agree, because the whole point of a wedding is to celebrate your love with your guests, and you don't want to do anything that's going to make it look like you just don't like each other.
Yeah, no jokes that diminish your love for one another.
100%. We actually went to a wedding where, I don't even know if you remember this, but the groom, I think there was some part in the ceremony where the groom had to kneel down, and you could see the bottom of his shoes, and they literally said, "Help me" on his shoes. And I remember getting the ick then, and that was probably more than 10 years ago.
Wow.
It must have been more than 10 years ago. And the couple, they're still happily married. And so it was obviously a joke. But I just remember being that's so gross. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. Here is an ick. It is something that guests do. So this ick is not for couples. This ick is something that guests do. So if you're a guest, this is something that people do. Somebody wrote in and said, people asking, how much did you make in the cards? Disgusting. And you know what? I didn't even know people did this. I didn't know that guests had the audacity to ask the couple how much money they got in the cards from other guests.
Wow. I've never heard of that either. And that is kind of crazy because it can lead to some very awkward conversations.
I know.
Yeah.
Another one that's a similar thing that I've heard is when guests comment to the couple on how expensive the wedding is.
Right.
So oh, how much did you spend on this? Or even just things like, oh, you must have had a lot of money in your budget. Things that imply something about the financial status of the couple.
Yeah, for sure. That is interesting, for sure.
Definitely icky. So my advice for guests, just don't.
Appreciate the wedding no matter what it is.
Yeah, that's it. Appreciate what it is. Maybe find something you could say that's a positive thing that doesn't have to do with the financial stuff. So, for example, you could comment on how well the wedding was planned. You can be like, oh, this wedding was so well organized, or this wedding is so fun. Like, you don't have to say like, oh, it's super expensive. You can just say, oh, it's a really fun wedding, or like, love the meal you chose, or whatever. Like,
yeah, makes a lot of sense.
That's enough. You don't need to comment on the finances. Okay, Glenn, do you have another one? I think we got a few that were kind of grouped together.
Yeah,
do you want to just read those?
Read all. I've got 3 here. Do you want me to read them all?
Yeah, read them all. Let's hear them. They're all similar topics.
Overly lovey-dovey speeches. I did the mushy lovey-dovey part in private.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Through a sentimental gift. I kept the speech tame but sweet at the same time. And then another person said, the 30-40 minute speeches. I gave each of ours a 3-minute deadline. Make it short. And then another one said, the groom's vows or speech being really crude and disrespectful.
Lots of thoughts about speeches here.
Yeah.
I think I'm on the same page about a lot of these things. Like, you don't want to have anything be rude or disrespectful.
Yeah.
You also don't want to be, like super mushy. It's one thing to, like when you hear a speech and it's like somebody's using the word wife or husband or spouse or something for the first time. Like, that's quite sweet because it's like, oh my gosh, you're watching them use that language for the first time. But when they get like super into calling each other lover or something, we've heard that before. Somebody used the word lover in their vows, I think, and we turned to each other and we were like, oh, that's weird. So yeah, it's like keeping it appropriate for everyone.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think there's a sweet spot when it comes to speeches in terms of like the love that you show. And where that balance is, who knows, but probably somewhere where you're not making people cringe because of the way that you're expressing your love for your spouse, whatever that might be, that probably makes a good sense, like makes a lot of sense. And
that's true.
Don't want to go too far where people are like, oh, yeah. I don't need to be here for this.
But I suppose you probably don't want to be too far on the other side of the spectrum where it's like very clinical. Like you want to be able to be heartfelt, emotional, but without being awkward.
Yeah, that's why I think there's a sweet spot, and it's probably different for everybody, but you find your sweet spot and you're good. 30-40 minute speeches, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, that's long.
It's long. Like, I love listening to people's speeches at weddings, but, it also depends when the food comes.
Actually, that is such a good point, because I think I've said this on the podcast a couple of times before, but like, don't do your speeches before you fed people.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of ironic because it is 20 to 8 p.m. when we're recording and we have not eaten dinner, which is very unlike us. We normally eat at like 6:30, 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I always recommend that you feed your guests. So like if they have their canapes or there's a bread table or something to snack on during cocktail hour, then welcome them in and give them starters or bread or something, and then do some speeches. Maybe not even all the speeches, just like 1 or 2, and then the mains, and then another 1 or 2, and then dessert or cutting the cake or whatever. Because you're right, nobody wants to sit through 30 to 40 minutes of speeches, especially when they're hungry. Yeah. Everything's just worse when you're hungry.
Yeah. I feel like a good speech leaves you wanting more, so
true.
Whatever that time limit is, you want that time limit to hit once again the sweet spot that leaves them wanting more.
That's true. And the person who wrote in about that said that they'd given 3 minutes for each person. Yeah. That's a really good time to aim for. And then of course there are some speeches, like the couple, if they're doing speeches, that get a bit more time because people have been waiting for those speeches. So if they're a bit longer, that's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in agreement that speeches, people had a lot of opinions about speeches.
Yeah. Oh, and then groom's vows or speech being crude or disrespectful. Yeah. Keep it civil, it can be funny, but keep it honoring, right?
I suppose the thing people need to remember when writing a speech, whether you are the groom or the bride or the best man or whoever you are, like, this is someone's wedding. It's not their 21st. Like, this is not your time to roast people and make jokes about them. Like, you can make jokes that are like objectively funny, but not in a way that's disrespectful to anyone who's there. Or anyone who's not there, for that matter.
Don't let people cringe. I guess that's a simple rule. Don't
give them the ick. There we go. That's a good one. Okay, so we got a couple of people talking a little bit about, what people do for the gram. So somebody says, this is very, very controversial. the change of dress. You probably paid a fortune for a dress you'll never wear again. Make the most of it. Plus, the second dress will hardly beat the first one. And then in a similar vein, someone else said, anything that's done specifically for social media clout or because a celebrity did it. And I find this one really interesting because I'm always following wedding trends, and trends originate somehow from somewhere. Someone does something cool for the first time, and then other people do it. So I suppose there's probably a line. Like, where is the line when it comes to doing things because you've seen someone do it, and doing it for the gram, doing it for the clout?
Well, I feel like the first thing is like, everyone does, creates their wedding through inspiration, and everyone gets inspiration from somewhere.
True.
And there's probably no wrong place to get inspiration from.
Yeah.
And so, maybe if you're doing it just purely for like clout, that's maybe like, oh, let's think about it. But if it's like, if you're doing it for a reason because you really liked a particular thing, if it was a celebrity or whatever, and it's part of your memories, like, I think it's fine.
You know what? I think that's a good point. It doesn't matter where the inspiration comes from, but it matters why you're doing the thing that's inspired you. So if you're doing it because you love it, great. But if you're doing it just because you want attention, or actually even that's not a bad reason, is your wedding day. If you want attention, that's fine. But if you're doing it just because you want, like, to look really popular on Instagram, or you just want clout or whatever, that's probably not a great reason. But when it comes to the dresses thing, I took a long time to find a dress that I liked because I was super picky about it, that I couldn't imagine having to go through that again to try to find a second dress.
Right.
So personally, I don't understand it, but I can imagine if you're like a stylist or you're super into fashion and your guests all know that about you, that's a great excuse to have multiple dresses. We actually went to a wedding where the bride had 3 dresses, I think. Or 2. Oh, no, I know. She had 1 dress for the ceremony and for part of the reception. And then, because it was a British and Nigerian wedding, she then changed it into Nigerian traditional wear. And then later changed into a more relaxed kind of all-white jumpsuit for the dancing. And so that is probably an example of doing things in a way that actually makes sense for the type of wedding. So that probably does make sense. And then I think her husband changed outfits a couple of times too, in a similar way, like traditional wear, something comfortable, something super formal at the beginning.
Yeah.
So again, it's not necessarily the thing that gives people the ick, but maybe the reasoning why they do the thing.
Yeah.
Okay. We got tons of people, literally tons of people, talking about the same thing. So this one isn't necessarily controversial, it's just that a lot of people agree on it. So I'm going to read a few things, and this is all about the greeting after the ceremony. So many people get the ick from this. So someone said, I hate people touching me, and I was so uncomfortable during it. I felt that I had to do it, otherwise it would be rude, but if I could go back in time, I wouldn't do it. Someone else says, I'm not a hugger. I cringe when someone hugs me. My photographer made us hug over 100 people coming out of the venue, and they just hated that as well. Someone else said, again, the greeting line after the ceremony, I don't like it at all. Another person said, the greeting line after the ceremony, 100%. I tried to avoid it at ours, but it was a non-negotiable for my husband. And so I thought it was so interesting that so many people had the ick about this particular thing. And when I think about it, I don't think we did that at our wedding. I don't remember hugging 100 people.
We didn't hug everybody.
I am not a hugger.
Maybe for us, we didn't have anything formal.
Yeah, because I think for some people, it's like a formal thing where they've come out of the ceremony location, they're now married, and they stand somewhere where everybody then goes over to them and hugs them. Or it's like a line where they walk through the line and hug everyone as they walk through.
Wow.
So there are some weddings where that's a thing that's like expected of people.
Right.
And I can understand that if you're not a hugger, that's not fun.
Yeah. It feels like what makes the most sense is if you're not a hugger, then maybe don't do that.
Well, I think that's the thing. Like we've said so many times before, like your wedding, your way. And I think this is an example of that. It's like, if you're not a hugger, if you don't like the physical contact and there's a better way to express your appreciation, like do the thing that makes the most sense for you.
Yeah, don't do anything that you don't feel comfortable doing.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
That is true. And actually, I wrote down an idea. So we spoke about this, I don't even remember which episode, but we've shared this I think we share this in the context of not doing a first dance, because some people don't like all the spotlight on them. And so we did an episode, well, I did an episode a while ago about things you can do instead of a first dance if you don't want the spotlight on you. And I shared this idea for a game, which I think could be a good alternative to the whole greeting line thing as well. Because, okay, so the whole idea of the greeting line, I think, is so to make sure that you have a touch point with each guest. So you thank them for coming. So another way you can do that is something you can do at the reception. Basically, you play a super fun song, like whatever is really, really fun. I can't even think of an example, but just something super fun. But as a couple, you're sitting on chairs on the dance floor, and your photographer is primed to take photos of you on the dance floor, but with enough space for your guests to come table by table to join you for a photo during this fun song. And so if they're all kind of waiting, I don't know how you would coordinate it. I don't know where they would stand when they're waiting, but you would need someone to facilitate this, like the DJ or the MC or something, to be on the microphone being like, okay, table 3. And then everybody runs on from table 3. They all pose for a picture and then run off again. So it's not quite as, I suppose, intimate as like hugging each person, but you do get to have that moment with each one.
Yeah.
And then there's more time to actually connect with people in a different way later.
Yeah.
I think that's better.
It makes a lot of sense, actually.
Again, if you don't want to hug people, don't hug them. Hugging gives me the ick. Unless it's you, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple more. Things that couples just don't want to do at their own wedding. So it's not necessarily that they get the ick when other people do it, but it's the thought of doing it at their own wedding gives them the ick, if that makes sense. It's important to make a distinction there. So I've got 3 of them. One person said doing a first look before the ceremony is just not for me, is what this person says. Someone else says not doing a first dance. I know it's our day, but the idea of everyone looking at us dancing just doesn't appeal to me. I understand that. And then another person said they don't want to do a top table. And the reason that I kind of group these things together is because while they are 3 completely different topics, they all touch on the same thing, which is doing something that they didn't want to do. So as far as I'm concerned, that is actually the biggest ick. The biggest ick is being forced to do something that you don't want to do at your wedding, because that's not what it's about. So people should never have to do a first look if they don't want to. They shouldn't have to have a first dance if they don't want to. We didn't have a first dance at our wedding. They shouldn't have to have a top table either, because if that's not something they want to do, the real ick is being forced to do something that doesn't feel right for the scenario. So if anyone needs permission, we are giving you permission to do things your way. Don't give yourself the ick. Do it your way. I don't know if you have any opinions about that.
No, I agree completely. It's like, it's your wedding day. Everything that you should do should be something that you're excited about and love, and you shouldn't be forced to do anything that makes you want to cringe or whatever, because I feel like you'd be giving yourself the ick if you did something that you really didn't want to do.
That's
so
true.
Yeah, what you said makes perfect sense.
Don't give yourself the ick. That's our advice. I do have one more category to share. 2 wildly opposing thoughts about the same thing. And I think it's actually hilarious because, my opinions about this have changed like back and forth over time. So this is the topic of children at the wedding. One person says, I actually hate when children are excluded from events, as I have a 10-year-old, so kids are welcome. The next person says, couples being afraid to say they want a child-free wedding so it doesn't cause an argument. It's your day, your way. And I find that so interesting that one person gets the ick by excluding children and the other person gets the ick by feeling like they can't have a child-free wedding. And so I suppose for me it's a similar thing to the previous point where it's like the real ick is not being able to do things the way you want to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we had a child-free wedding, and I remember somebody that we knew, actually a couple of people we knew had very young children at the time, and they brought them to the ceremony anyway. And I didn't have the headspace to be irritated about it, because it's like, I'm already at my wedding and I have so many other things on my mind, I can't even care about it. But I remember shortly after being like, we specifically said this is an adult's wedding. Why have they brought their kids? But now that I'm a little bit more mature and I've interacted with 6-month-old children, I understand that they can't be separated from their parents. And it's not easy to get a babysitter for a 6-month-old who's relying on the mother to be fed and all those different things. So I think my opinions about it have probably shifted. So I don't know if you have any opinions on children in weddings. Apparently there's no right or wrong one because they're so different.
Yeah. Well, what I do know is that people have very strong opinions about that.
They do.
I certainly do not have strong opinions about it either way, because I kind of get both sides of the argument.
True.
You know, like I get it that, you know, when there's younger children that they need to be with their parents, but I also get it that if couples want their wedding to be a particular way, like it is their wedding, and so.
Yeah.
I guess it's like, look at the context and look who your friends are and what you want to do. That makes the most sense to me. Yeah,
that is true. Actually, I did post. I posted a reel on Instagram a few weeks ago about the concept of inviting kids to a wedding, and at the top of the screen it said like something like my guests, and they had said something like, can I bring my kids to the wedding? They won't cause any, or they won't make any noise or something like that. But then in the video it was, I don't know if you remember the breakdancer from the Olympics, so it was her breakdancing but in the setting of a wedding ceremony location, and I just thought it was hilarious. But apparently so did a bunch of other people, because we got loads of comments from people saying, this is why I'm having a kid-free wedding. But you know what, we have nephews and a niece, and I feel like now that I've experienced how much joy they bring to us, I can understand why people want the kids in their world to be in the wedding, or at least to be at the wedding, because they're special to you as well. So the point here is, do what you want to do, really. Don't feel like you have to have kids at the wedding if you don't want to. Don't feel like you can't have kids at the wedding if you want to. You have to do it the way that you want to do it. Yeah. So I think our main point for today is, don't give yourself the ick. I like that. Yeah.
That as long as you're happy, then there is no ick to be had, right?
Yeah, that's true. That is very wise, very profound. Well, thank you for listening today. The Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast is produced by me, Kaylee, and mixed, mastered, and edited by Glen Hartman. For more wedding planning tips, advice, checklists, and more, visit weddingsonline.ie.